Thanks.
All right, thank you. I would like to call the Town of Rocky Hill Planning and Zoning Commission Zoom remote meeting of July 15, 2020 to order. My name is Dimple Desai, Chairman of the Commission. I'll just go over some brief logistics as I have been doing in the past. Public speakers who have requested to speak during the public portion of the meeting or any of the proposals for Commission's action is already given Zoom remote meeting link to participate. IT staff will assist me in recognizing the public speaker as they are listed on the speakers list. Because we are in a Zoom remote meeting, I'm going to go over some guidelines that I would like everyone to strictly follow so that we have a complete record of our meeting. There will be a queue for speakers. Speakers will be recognized by IT staff. All the speakers are requested to keep themselves muted and video turned off until they are needed to participate. Not following this request will result in IT muting the speakers. Speak clearly, state your name and address for the record. You will have 2 minutes to speak, therefore please monitor your time. IT will mute your speaker if you go over and the next speaker will be recognized. These are very important steps as we are participating remotely, so please respect these requests. At this time, I would like to introduce the commission members and the staff present for this meeting. On my left is, I think I don't see Guy Drippo. Commissioner Drippo is not here yet. Commissioner Giuseppe Aglico. I don't see Commissioner Tom Roybell. It's myself, Commissioner Alan Merhose, Commissioner Phil Silvestro, Commissioner Ron Robbins. We also have Kim Ritchie, Town Planner, Eileen Knapp, Recording Secretary. For the benefits of commissioners, assuming we are sitting in the council chambers, I'll start recognizing commissioners from left and go to the right for comments. To avoid multiple conversations at this time, I will recognize commissioner when it is the turn to speak. Having said that, I just like to recognize, and Commissioner Silvestro will hate me for this, but I like to recognize Commissioner Silvestro's dedication to the town as a former council member and as a Rocky Hill P&Z Commission member. It has been brought to our attention, Mr. Silvestro will not be with us starting next meeting and will be resigning the P&Z Commission. So I would like to applaud Mr. Silvestro's service for the town, and I think you will be missed going forward. I'll be missing your insight on the proposals as well. Having said that, anybody who wants to talk, anybody wants to?
No,
Not,
it's been an honor to work with you for all these years.
Well, Commissioner, let me just thank you for your comments, your kind comments. Both exciting in terms of what's before me, but sad. Rocky Hill has been my home since 1966, and I have served in some manner or capacity pretty much every year since the early 70s on the Wetlands Commission, on the Planning and Zoning Commission, on the council, and then back on the Planning and Zoning Commission. I might have been born and raised in New Britain. My home is Rocky Hill. And I'd be lying if I said I'm not going to miss Rocky Hill and miss serving the town in some way. Hopefully, I occasionally manage to do some good. But I thank you all for your comments. Thank you.
thank you. let's move on to a continuation of the public hearing from June 17, 2020. Commissioner Glico, do you want to read the public hearing notice?
Sure. A, special permit application, site plan, 150 Dividend Road LLC. Proposing to construct a previously approved 1,600 square foot addition to an existing building and to construct 5 additional buildings, 30,700 square feet, and associated site improvements for the use as contractors' buildings for property located at 150 Dividend Road in a BP-1 Business Park Zoning District, ID 14-153. Continued for the following items are to be presented: public questions, comments on these items, and commission's questions and comments on these items. Applicant's rebuttal. 1, location of transformer and dumpsters with enclosures. 2, hours of operation to be noted. 3, rooftop units to be screened. 4, is there a need for oil water separators? 5, uses allowed on site and those clearly not allowed. 6, sidewalks are to be proposed along the property frontage shown and detail provided. 7, evergreens to be planted along the rear slope. 8, additional information required for justification of requested grade waiver and associated drainage for the parking area from 5% to 6.7% under section 7.4.4.1.8 of the Rocky Hill zoning regulations. You're muted.
Thank you. This public hearing has been closed, and I think we are going to hear back from the applicant and or his representative about these 8 items that were just read.
The hearing was recessed, not closed.
Was it reset or?
I was recessed.
Recess.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was recess. Correct my record.
No big deal.
Good. Good evening. For the record, my name is Jim Cassidy, professional engineer and principal with the firm of Halsey, Pearson and Cassidy, representing Guy Ruckamora, who owns 150 Dividend Road. Last month, Justin Packard from my office had done a presentation. I was on the beginning part, but had to leave early to get to another meeting. I'm going to pick up on it. He went over the items that were outstanding. I'm going to first start by saying, unfortunately, things have been chaotic around here, and we were just able to finish revised plans yesterday. So you don't even have revised plans. So I'm really not expecting approval because your staff has not even had a chance to look at them yet. So we'll probably end up continuing this to the next meeting. There are a few items in your comments that I wanted to go through and make sure I'm clear before I add anything to the plans. So first, I'd like to go over the items that have been addressed. One of the first comments was that we needed to add a transformer location to the plan. So I'm going to share my screen if it's okay with everybody. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So can you see the hand on the screen? Can you see the hand moving around?
No.
No. Okay. Give me a second. Can you see the red mark?
Okay, got it.
Yeah, now we got it. Yep.
So this is the overall site layout plan. So what we've done is we've eliminated 2 parking spaces in this area and showed a transformer location. The power is going to be coming off the pole along Dividend Road, along the front of these parking spaces and feeding this transformer. From there, we're looking to come out and have a handhaul to service the 2 buildings across the way back to this building and to the end building. Building number 1, this would be the first building that would be built, and we're hoping we could come off the utility pole along Dividend Road and directly into the building. We showed the locations. I'll just pre-warn you, it seems any time once we commence the project and we file the plans with the appropriate utility company, they always have a tendency to change things on me. But we have provided, I think, more than an adequate area at this point to accommodate a transformer on this site. So that was item number 1 that we addressed. I'm going to jump to number 3. There's a question about rooftop units. We were not proposing any rooftop units here. All we have within the buildings themselves are a small office, only a couple hundred square feet up at the front corner of each one of the bays. The remaining area would be more storage or storage of vehicles or supplies for small contractors such as a plumber, electrician, or a drywall contractor. The AC was going to be handled by mini split systems. So it's a self-contained unit where there's a very small condenser on the outside of the building. We've added these 2 squares on either side of the building. These would be the pad that the mini split systems sit on. They're directed so they're away from the residents along the back. And then on this side, they're facing towards the commercial property to the north. And then on this building, they're going to be facing out towards the parking lot. So they're away from the residents along the back side of it. No rooftop units are proposed. If anyone's seen a mini split, the condensing unit is not much bigger than a large suitcase. And then it's a wall pack on the inside of the building. So there'd be one system for each one of the bays, not a big system for the entire building. Continuing on, is there a need for a oil separator? The uses in the building were proposed are basically contractors' use. There's no automotive repair uses proposed in these buildings. If we had automotive uses, you would need to have a oil water separator outside the building, but there's none of those uses proposed. I will note, if you take a look at the utility plan to ensure that any, sorry, I gotta go back one page. This is our site utility plan. What we have done to ensure if there's any oils or greases on the site, the first catch basin of the system, we replaced it with a Vortechnics unit. So it's a gross particle separator that's going to pick up the whole paved parking area, all the catch basins, and collect any oils or sediment that would be on this parking lot. Collect it before it's treated or before it's discharged into the town system. So there are provisions on the outside. But again, in the buildings, there's no automotive uses proposed. So there's no oil water separators required at this point. Continuing on, the next comment was about planting some evergreen trees along this rear slope. We have added, if I go back to the landscaping plan, which is the second to the last sheet in the plan, what's going to happen at the back slope is it's better than a 2-to-1 slope right now. Steeper than a 2-to-1 slope right now. We're gonna have to regrade it, so it's a 2-to-1 slope. Can't plant trees on the slope itself. That kind of a grade of the trees will never survive. But there is an area, a flat area, right up at the top edge of it. What we're proposing to do is add a arborvitae hedgerow consisting of about 26 arborvitaes right at the edge of it to provide screening to the residents that are along the west side of that. The remaining portion of the slope would be regraded to 2-to-1. It'd be revegetated with a meadow wildflower mix. So we'd only need a periodic mowing. It wouldn't have to be mowed like a regular lawn. But there's not really a lot in the way of trees and shrubs that I recommend planting on that slope that would ever survive. I think they're better off spending the money and putting them up at the top of the slope. Continuing on, there was a comment about the grades of the property. Your regulation says you can't have a parking lot grade in excess of 5%. The commission wanted us to go through and justify, we were at like 6.7%. So we ended up going back through, reworking the grades. We actually figured out that the impact was not going to be that significant as we originally thought. So we're actually able to rework all the grades. So the main access driveway is at 5%, and therefore the adjoining park lot is at 5% also. What it did is it dropped the back building about 2 feet in elevation. And then incrementally, these side buildings had to drop also. So 0 increase for building number 1. It's about 1 foot for building number 3 and 4, about 1.5 feet for building 4. And sorry, a foot for building 2 and 3, about 1.5 feet for building 4, and then about 2 feet for building 5. We went back and we checked our earthwork quantities. We do generate a little material. My initial estimate was about 9,000 yards. It actually works out to about 2,000 yards, but that's also accounting for some stockpile material that needs to be removed from the site. Anyways, there's some old debris, concrete, and things that need to be removed. So it's tough to get an exact number, but I think by the time we're said and done, it's pretty much going to be a balanced site. The other items I would like to talk to the commission about, there was a request that we put on hours of operations onto the plans. And I think that's stemming basically from making sure that there's not a lot of noise, people working at late hours of the night. A lot of the contractors in here are landscape contractors, and during the winter, they're doing plowing. So I think the better way to handle this is to make sure that they conform with your town ordinance section 180, which is your noise ordinance, which requires certain levels of noise. Didn't want to put hours of operation for a snowplow contractor that has a snowstorm at midnight and needs to come in and pick up his equipment. That's probably the majority of the contractors that are going to be out here. So I didn't think it was fair to put in hours of operation of like 7 to 5 when we know that that's going to be the case, and we'd be constantly battling it. I think the better way is to note on the plan that we need to conform with your town ordinance section 180, the noise ordinance, and obviously everyone's on notice. So if there is a problem, they can be shut down. Your town ordinance, does things like require you to be at certain decibel levels, but also requires that your equipment is in good running order. There's not pieces of equipment with no mufflers, loud beeping noises, and those type of things. So there'd be some control. But again, it didn't seem for this type of use appropriate to put an hour's operation limiting a contractor. Summer months, same thing. It's tough to put an hour of operation of 7 to 5 when in the summer you've got sunlight till 8 o'clock, and a lot of the guys mowing the yards and doing landscaping are working to 8 o'clock. So it's tough to put a restriction on it. But again, your town ordinance on noise, they talk about the daylight hours being from 7 to 9 p.m. So that would be, I think, a fair time to say that they'd be working out here. The other thing I would like to talk about is permitted uses. Basically, what we did is our notes section, we went back through and we listed previous zoning regulations, all the uses that were permitted by site plan approval. As I mentioned, we're not proposing any automotive uses within the buildings. But because automotive use is a special permit, obviously, if they're going to be proposing that, they would have to come back to the commission and justify it. I don't see it happening, that type of use, but I don't want to preclude it either. And I think it's fair to, require, we noted under the regulations, the sections that they have to comply with for allowed uses or site plan uses. Excuse me 1 second, I'm just trying to blow up my screen here. So we added this whole table. This is under note 42 under the general notes section, and it talks about section 4.4b2. The following uses are permitted by special permit site plan, and then also the special uses that are permitted by site plan. We went all the way through public buildings, private schools, although I doubt those ever go in there. I think, again, you're looking at basically contractors that would be in here. But if it is a special permit use and they want to put it in there, they got to come back to the commission anyways. So I would say that we need to comply with section 4B2 of the zoning regulations for allowed uses. I don't want to preclude any other uses just by putting it on the plans. So that was the two, I guess, text items I needed to include into the plan. The final thing that I'd like to talk about, if I can zoom to the rendering, was, I know this is always a fun one, but sidewalks. I know in your town ordinance, what the town ordinance says is that if someone's subdividing property, the developer is required to put sidewalks in. It also goes on to state that if the town manager or designated appointee requires any business to put sidewalks in, then the burden is on the owner of that property. So there is a mechanism to require sidewalks. I guess I asked the question, if I blow up on Google Maps and take a look at this site, let me annotate this again. A second. So this is the property at 150 Dividend Road here. I know there's a sidewalk here at the intersection of Rachel. That sidewalk system obviously is to bring any school children within the Rachel Drive subdivision all the way out to Dividend Road where they can pick up the bus. But if I go all the way up Dividend Road, my next set of sidewalks is going to be this little crosswalk here at Woodlawn. And then the next set of sidewalks actually on Dividend Road is in front of Ames on the opposite side of the road. Believe me, I'm all for sidewalks, but I'm also for sidewalks where they make sense. To me, putting a section of sidewalks in front of this property and when everything is developed along the road all the way up, to me, it just doesn't make any sense to put sidewalks in here. But I'd gladly listen to the opinions of the commission and continue the conversation on the requirement of sidewalks in this area. So I believe that addressed the 7 comments that you had, or 8 comments that you had. With that, I open it back to the commission and gladly answer any questions you may have. And let me know if you want me to stop sharing my screen.
I think you can keep the screen up, at least if anyone has any comments, they can go back. With that, I will ask Commissioner Giuseppe, Glico. You have any comments?
You're muted. You're muted. He's muted.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Jim, if you have Google Earth open, can you go to Street View at that location?
Sure.
Because I actually looked at that as well. I was just wondering if I guess one of the concerns is you can see if you were to go down more in front of this building, you could see that there's pedestrians in the street.
Mm-hmm.
There's a center, I guess a CrossFit place that opened up next door, and people tend to be running along the street. And at some point, I've seen that they actually run up Rachel Drive and come back around. Is there any sidewalks along the side street here going up?
Forest? No.
Yeah.
Forest is the next intersecting street. So that's Forest Street.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just, looking at the whole point of sidewalk is to keep people off the road, and it just, you can see that they're running on the road.
You believe me, I get it, but I also, again, I agree. The sidewalks are a good thing, but I don't know. I just feel that where everything's developed and there's no other sidewalks, there needs to be some kind of like a master plan to really bring the whole sidewalk plan together. Putting pieces of sidewalks in, personally, to me, is an issue. I don't know if I should tell this little story or not, but I'm sure Kim probably remembers. But about 20 years ago, there was an area in Plainville where my mother-in-law was walking along a road, and there was a section walking along a section of sidewalks, and the sidewalks ended. She stepped out on the road and she was hit by a car and killed. So again, it promoted someone to walk along sidewalks and then have to step out into the road. So unless I just think there's a better use for putting a master plan together and really putting sidewalks where it's going to connect with something else, or until such time we can come up with a plan to run sidewalks all the way along Dividend Road. It doesn't make sense to be put, promoting kids at that crosswalk, walking 150 feet up our frontage, and then have to step out into the road because there's nothing there. I see the people here for CrossFit pace. I mean, they're runners, they're athletes, and they do this all the time. They won't run along roads. But for people that are not used to it. I'm not a big fan of promoting walking along sidewalks it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything.
And you're thinking that your thoughts are that the buses drop the people off in front of Rachel and they're walking up Rachel. There's nobody walking down Rachel onto.
I have not personally seen. I'm not going to say they're not, but I have not seen it. I think the intent when I did Rachel Drive, the intent was if the school bus came down here, there's a place for the kids to get all the way down to the intersection of Dividend Road. I have personally not seen, but again, I'm not out there every day, so I can't say no one's ever done it. But they're going to go from here. They're going to go to this next telephone pole.
Yeah.
And then no place from there.
Last question I have is when we were talking about the transformer pad, we actually were talking about all utilities, and one of the utilities was gas. And he noted that there is gas at the first building, that
Yep.
the existing building. Is there plans for extending the gas through the whole site or no?
Yeah, we bring gas into it, but again, the problem we always run into is, I show something on the plans, the gas company almost always has the ultimate say. All the utilities company have the ultimate say. So they change it. It's a good idea to show a location for a transformer. We always get hit with that one. Yep. Because by the time you put a transformer in and all the protective bollards, it takes up a lot more area than you anticipate. But yes, there would be gas. We'll submit to the gas company and they'll give us a map as to how they want to run gas services to these buildings.
We spoke about the transformers as well as a dumpster pad. Was there a location?
That's a good point, yes. So we did add a dumpster pad to the plan in this location here. So that way a truck can come in, make this corner, go straight into the pad, back out, and then go straight out the driveway. We added a dumpster pad in that location there.
So you feel one dumpster location is sufficient?
It's recycling and a garbage. I'll go through it with the developer again and make sure he's comfortable with it. But right now there's nothing out there. So yeah, from what I've seen going on, I feel so most of you guys are contractors. For instance, there's a mason contractor in there. He goes to the job with his supplies and he disposes of his materials at the project. A lot of these guys aren't bringing the material back. A lot of it, like even an electrical contractor, a drywall contractor, they're disposing of the materials at the construction site. A lot of them are not bringing material back to the site, other than incidental things, food containers or from their lunch or papers or so on and so forth from letters or something along that lines.
Okay.
It's not like a factory where we're building things or manufacturing facility where we're taking products in. It's not a lot of trash generated with this.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let me see. Okay. Commissioner or host?
I don't have anything now, but I think should we recess this, we should recess it under the condition that we can discuss anything that might be on the plans that we get between now and next month that might crop up that we don't address after tonight. But that's all
Yes.
I really have.
Right, I think I believe that is given. If there is a new information introduced, I think we can talk about that. And even public can talk about those things. So
Yeah, that's it for me on this for now.
Commissioner Silvestro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, on the transformer pad, I can't tell if there are ballards there or if they're necessary.
It's surrounded with bollards. Anytime it's adjacent to a driveway or parking area, it has to have bollards around it. So
Okay, and you said something about gas being extended to all the buildings?
yeah. So what I'm anticipating is that we have a sewer line. If I go to the utility plan, I got a sewer line down the center, a water line on the opposite, storm drainage. Right now, we're bringing the power in underneath the driveways to this transformer location and feeding off into the individual buildings. Gas is probably going to either come between the storm and the electric, or it had to come on the other side of this water line. I could put it on the plans, but I'm gonna be quite honest, every time I do it, it gets changed 100% from whatever I show
Sure.
on the plan by the time I submit to the gas company. So I don't even guess it anymore.
Okay, and staff has still got to look at all of this yet.
Yeah.
Other than a comment that I like what you did with the arborvitae's on the back line, I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, I just was wondering about the addition of the permitted uses. Our questions are based on the proposed use. So the questions we're asking and things we're looking at are based on the proposed use. But when we add the permitted uses, then that seems to open the door to the question about, well, what if somebody, and we don't know who yet is going to rent these buildings, if they come in and then they want to put in a wholesale commercial operation or automotive repair.
If there is a different use being proposed, they would have to, if it's an automotive repair, they would have to go to Zoning Board of Appeals and back to this commission. If the commission approves this project for contractors' yards or contractors' uses, and it is not such a thing, they would have to come back to this commission.
Okay, so we're not, by putting that in the plan, we're not mistakenly proposing this for any of those, I mean, approving this for those permitted uses that are now listed in the site plan.
If you're listing uses, if you're listing actual uses on the plans, you may be doing that. However, if they require a special permit, if it's a special permit use, they would still have to come back by the regulations. They would have to come back.
Yeah.
So the way we have it on the plan right now is we noted that all the different uses and which ones were site plan and which ones were special permit. Again, I think staff needs to review it. If they don't like the wording of the note, then we could change it. But
We haven't seen these as of this
right,
point.
and again, I apologize, things been a little chaotic. So we just finished up yesterday and I didn't want to give it to the commission last minute. It wasn't fair. So it'll give you some time and staff time to review it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, those were my only questions. Just, you know, as we review this for contractor buildings, it's different than if we reviewed it for something else that potentially come on the line. But if we're going to capture that through the special permitting process, if that changes, and the town's actually notified that the lessor or the lessee is actually doing that at that location, you know, that it would just affect the scope of the project, whether it be for traffic or environmental issues or so on. But so that was the purpose of the clarification, is that this proposal is simply being put forward for this specific proposed use and nothing else at this point in time. So that's all I have.
All right. I just have a couple of follow-up comments. The first is the sidewalk, and I'm stuck on sidewalks. And just to clarify, town manager does not have the authority to approve or disapprove the sidewalks. And it was made very clear, and I remember when we took on that article that we wanted to put in our ordinance, that this is specifically for creating that account and the use of funds within the sidewalk account. And I knew it, and we had discussed this ad nauseum, and we knew like somebody will bring it up. And here we go. It is up here because it is allowed by ordinance. Obviously now it is, allowed by, should be allowed by zoning. Having said that, if you don't take step one, you will never take step two. And I always believe, we want to make this town walkable. The world is changing. People are walking everywhere, in industrial areas where they don't have sidewalks, as we saw people running. So I am a big proponent of sidewalk, and if we don't take the first step, we will never take the second step. So that's my view on the sidewalks. On the permitted use, I agree with Commissioner Robbins' concern. Because the other uses are listed, automatically those are allowed uses. Just because it says contractor yard doesn't mean that, only somebody titled with contractor has to come in and is allowed. As far as the notes and all that says these uses are allowed, they are allowed. Doesn't matter what title you give to this proposed development. So we would like to, we would like staff to concentrate on that and narrow the uses, because the whole purpose to identify the uses was to make sure that there are no other uses than what has been, discussed, because it can have an impact. The third is the gas line. Now, what if a contractor needs a gas, or needs, and he is the only one that requires. Now, are you going to put propane tanks in order to satisfy that one contractor who needs it badly? What are the restrictions? Can you bring propane tank or not? So I think it is a good idea. And again, doesn't matter that it changes later on. That's okay. But to identify that you have the utilities that are serving the site within the site is very important. To know that, yes, you are going, there is a possibility of a gas line because you have identified that. There is a possibility of electrical line. There is a possibility of telephone line, or whatever you want to call. So all these utilities should be identified regardless of what the end product may look like. So those are my comments, and I would like engineering department and the staff to look at this and provide their comments as well.
Could I make a comment before?
Yeah.
On the uses, each one of these uses has been pointed out by Jim and Kim and I think someone else. They have to come in and get a special permit approval to actually do something. Right now, I think the proposal is just to build shell buildings, for example. Then they're going to be going out looking for tenants. So you may find a tenant as a snowplow guy, someone who's storing his equipment or whatever. And as each building is being occupied, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, I think each one has to come into the Planning and Zoning Commission or the ZBA for approval to do whatever they want to do in that building. Is that correct?
I don't see it that way, Alan. I see them coming in as the project itself is for contractors' uses. If something is other than that, they would need to come before Planning and Zoning.
Okay, so each one of these buildings right now is being proposed as a contractor use.
That's my understanding.
Correct.
So that greatly simplifies the uses. If anything is going to deviate from any approval that we might give on this application, they would have to come in too. Like, let's say somebody wants to open up a gym or an exercise room, then they have to come in because that's not what might be approved next month when we actually act on this. Is that correct?
It's my understanding, based on, again, I think Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my understanding is that all the uses are listed that are allowed by the regulation. So, like church and all that, granted, those things are not going to happen, but I think all those uses that are allowed are listed here. So unless Jim says, no, they're not going to come.
Okay.
No, any use that's allowed by special permit would be permitted. We anticipate it's going to be contractors. Right now you have landscape contractors out there. You got a mason contractor. We're hoping to, entice like a small plumbing contractor, drywall contractor, electrical contractor, those type of uses. I can't say, I don't want to prohibit other uses in the future. Who knows what the future is going to hold? For items such as automotive repair, that's, as Kim said, you got to go to ZBA and it's a special permit. I need to come back to this commission. So anything that's a special permit, you would definitely come back to the commission. Right now, we're looking at contractors' uses, but anything that's a special permit, and we can work on the note with Kim again, and specify any use that would have to come back to this commission that's not part of this approval.
Okay, so I think what we probably would be interested in, at least me, is more specifics about what the use is that you're coming in for now, so that if anything is over and beyond what we are approving or will approve next month, if we do, then they have to come in for an approval. Is that permissible?
Well, contractors' yards, we're not going to get into the weeds as far as the type of contractor.
Right, yeah.
They've
But I mean,
they've already represented to the commission that there will be no outdoor storage. Obviously, if someone comes in and they have outdoor storage, they would either need approval or to rent another unit in the building and store the materials inside. There may be similar uses, like Jim says, the automotive uses, they have to go to ZBA and then come here. So we, as I said, and Jim said, we haven't seen these revised plans as of this point in time. I'm sure when we see what the notes are on the plans, that may shed some light on this conversation.
Yeah, and that's another big thing is, there's going to be some things on the plans that we may not be aware of right now that will show up next month. So, okay, I just wanted to clarify that and make sure that we weren't overly restricting it or under restricting it. And with that, I'm all set.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask another question?
Yeah.
I want to get back to this natural gas thing again. Jim, is it the intent of the applicant to ask C&G to bring service into the site?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Good. I think that supports
Well,
what the chairman is saying.
Sure.
That going forward, there may be people on the site that will want to access that particular utility, meaning natural gas. And I would rather it be brought in now
that's fine.
than thinking about propane tanks and stuff like that, which I would not like to see.
Yeah, not a problem.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for staff.
Yeah.
Kim, in reference to storage, because that was brought up a few times, we're talking material storage. What about vehicles, unregistered vehicles? I know a lot of times you got landscapers that have multiple vehicles. They're not registered for the whole year. They're just parked.
We have a separate town ordinance concerning unregistered vehicles. There are requirements, and it would fall under the town ordinance.
Okay, so it just falls under the ordinance.
Correct.
All right. Any other comments from anyone? Jim, you want to address anything, or you all set?
No, I've got it. We're going to add the gas to it.
Okay.
And we'll continue the discussion on sidewalks.
Okay.
And I'll give Kim a set of plans and enough plans for the commission to review for your next meeting, which I believe is August 17th.
I believe it's the 19th. It's the third
Okay.
Wednesday. There is a section in the appendix. It talks about what is required for a site plan, and I believe the last item is proposed sidewalks. Just so the commission is aware.
All right. Thank you.
Chairman, would you like me to make a motion to recess?
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Could I just amend that motion pending any subsequent plans that come in between now that we'll review, so that we can limit it to actually new material?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Because it
Okay,
was a
thanks.
continued public hearing, I don't know if there's anybody that signed on to make any comments on these particular items from the.
Right. I just want to make sure, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this application related to those eight items. All right, so I see that there are no public comments requested, so we would move on. And
Okay.
I think,
Well,
I think I would like to have everyone's vote to recess the public hearing with the comments that Commissioner Marcos added.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we'll move on to the public agenda, item 3. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission on any of the items not on the agenda? Seeing none, let's move on to item 4, which is the consent agenda. Can I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Just
Yeah.
a point of order. I don't know who was, that's for, I don't know who was at the last meeting that can vote. I'm not sure what the,
I believe everybody was there.
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to clarify that. So we
Yeah,
don't get-
yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
aye.
Aye. So motion passes. Let's move on to agenda item 5A.
Would you like me to read that?
I think we
No,
moved it, so we don't have to read that
we
now.
don't have to do that.
Let's move on to item 5B.
5B?
Yep.
Discussion and set hearing for Town of Rocky Hill to add section 3.f to the Rocky Hill zoning policy for Reasonable Accommodation, American with Disabilities Act, ADA, and Fair Housing Act, FHA.
I believe this is put on by town staff. And Kim, you want to give some background?
The history behind this, and some of you may be aware of it. Last year, there had been a very
Oh, you cut.
We lost you.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, there was a variance application applied for last year for a gentleman who was very upfront and did state on the record at the time his choice that he had certain disabilities. But that wasn't what he was doing. He was looking for a shed in his front yard. The shed was actually put up without benefit of approval in the gentleman's front yard. They were asked through a violation process to come in to seek variance approval. They went to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The action was, it was denied without prejudice, but the argument for hardship and hardships and the Zoning Board of Appeals must run with the land and the regulations that they're seeking to vary. The hardship dealt with disability. That kind of put a red flag on everything for the board at the time. It was still denied without prejudice, but that raised a red flag for staff and the board. We consulted with our town attorney, who is our current town attorney at the time. And we, both Dave Pomberg, CEO, and myself met with her, and we discussed the possibility of putting something in the regulations, which other towns have done also. And we've kind of combined some things with other towns into what's before you this evening. A regulation where the staff and the commission can approve what's called the reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act and or American with Disabilities Act. It is a finite approval in that once the accommodation is no longer needed for whatever the reason may be, it would lapse. the approval would essentially lapse. Unlike a variance, a zoning variance runs with the land. Once it's recorded on the land records, it's good for anybody that buys that property ad infinitum. We sat down with the town attorney after a draft was put together, which is basically before you. And she commented very positively on the draft and said, when you go to hearing, let me run it by me again right before the hearing. So she's seen this version of it, and she concurs with it. We're very careful in this not to violate any HIPAA orders, in that we cannot, whether it be town staff and/or the commission, ask someone directly what their disability may be. If people choose to be very upfront about that, that's their choice, not ours. We don't pry there. But what we would do is obtain documentation from the requisite physician that would state that, for example, Kim Ritchie, having a disability requires a reasonable accommodation to, and I'll use this other case, to put a shed out in my front yard as the backyard is uneven ground. Boom, done. We cannot question that because that's coming from an expert. We don't have that expertise. What would happen is they would come to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and there's a process in here as far as what's required. It has the process listed out as far as timeframes go, as far as what's required. We can get feedback from other staff members as well. And they would come before the commission, and something, if it is approved, would be filed on the land records for as I said, a finite period of time until the accommodation is no longer needed. Whether that be the individual moves or unfortunately passes, or if it's a temporary disability, that the disability is no longer present. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I don't know if you wanted to go. I mean, this is not a public hearing, so I didn't feel like going through line by line, but if you want to do that, we certainly can. This is applicable, I must say, to residential properties. Just so you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, that.
I was just going to say that, we should probably just go to public hearing, get comments, and then see what kind of comments we get, and then review it at that time. Because otherwise we might be repeating a lot of things that the public might be discussing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm fine with that. We can think it's a good idea. We can just go and set up a public hearing.
Which is the purpose of the hearing in the
Yep.
first place. Which,
Yep.
okay.
I did send it over to the town's ADA coordinator for review and comment, so I should be getting some comments back from them also. But if there are any, I don't know if people have read this, hopefully they have. If there are any glaring comments, if you want to get back to me, even if it's individual basis, please do so.
Okay. All right. So do you have dates where you want to?
Because we do have to forward this on to the Regional Planning Agency, that is not exempt. This is not COVID related, so it is not exempt under the governor's orders. I would state this, it should be sometime in September.
Okay. All right. So I think I would like to have a motion for that, right? To set something up for September timeframe.
The first meeting in September is September 16th.
You said 16th?
16, yes.
And I have a
Okay,
motion.
a motion to set a public hearing for Town of Rock, add section 3F to the Rocky Hill zoning regulations zoning policy for Reasonable Accommodation Aid Americans with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing Act for 6 p.m. on September 16th, did you say?
Yes.
Is that
Second,
6 or 6:30?
6:30.
6:30.
When we have a hearing, we start at 6. Well, my motion is for 6.
For the date, yeah, okay. Second,
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
all in favor? Aye.
I,
Motion passes 5-0. Let's move on to agenda item 5C.
Okay, 5C, discussion and set hearing for Town of Rocky Hill to modify sections of the Rocky Hill zoning regulation. Section 4.A.1, Town Center, TC District, Section 4.B.1, residential uses, 4.E. Special provisions within the Town Center, TC District, 6.C.4, area and bulk requirements for active adult housing, 6.E.2, area and bulk requirements for housing for the elderly.
Again, I think this is, Kim, you want to give us background?
I will do that, and I think just so the commission is aware, before planning and zoning meetings, I contact the chairman. So I know many of you sitting here on the commission this evening, I have done this process with for years. Dimple and I also continue this process. So today he and I reviewed the agenda and we did have a discussion on this regulation. So I am going to put forth what we discussed as well. Looking at the town center district in Rocky Hill and looking at the process that had been approved in our regulations and the lack of activity actually in our town center district, the process is rather arduous as far as creation of planned development districts, with respect to coming up with a plan, getting that approved, coming up with a zoning change, getting that approved, coming up with a special permit, getting that approved. So there's multiple applications that have to be filed with the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. I know in the past we discussed possibly putting forth mandatory pre-app in the town center district. That idea has been embraced and included in this language. You'll see there's a lot of cross-outs because we're taking out the plan development process. At least that's the proposal. Putting in mandatory pre-applications and either site plan approval or special permit approval depending on the underlying use. We're still concentrating on the mixed use development. That was the intent in our POCD from 2001, as well as the POCD from 2015. We're on the first page of the document under section 4B1, one of the discussions that Dimple, the current chairman, and I had today, as a matter of fact, was concerning active adult housing or housing for the elderly. That was included in here as part of a mixed use project. I know when this regulation first came about, there was some discussion on mixed use building where you have residences above non-residential uses, whether it be offices or small retail establishments. So mixed use building or mixed use project. A mixed use project is a larger scale, it might be a larger scale project where you may have a residential use in a separate building. You may have a non-residential use in a separate building, and you may also have a mixed use building with both residential and non-residential in it. So I don't want to leave any of those out. In the town center district, we do have a few larger parcels. Obviously Ames is the largest, but we do have a few on Silverstein Highway that may lend itself towards a mixed use project. But the majority of properties in the town center zone, if you do look at your zoning map, have smaller lot sizes. We'll get into more detail during the public hearing, obviously. But the thought of Do we want to just be broad and say a residential use as part of a mixed use project? Residential use versus housing for the elderly or active adult housing. That way, if we use active adult housing and housing for the elderly, we're kind of pigeonholing the type of residential use that we're allowing in the town center zone. I don't know, Dimple, if that was
Yeah. So
what the upshot was for part of our discussion.
yes, I think you're correct. And you know, when I read this regulation, what we wanted to do is say residential, and residential does include active adult, elderly, young couple with kids. So it is very broad. Now, when we start including different types of residential uses, now we get into what is the percentage of adult housing, or what is the percentage of like elderly housing that we are talking about here. So I think rather than getting into and pigeonholing each and every use, I think if we use like a residential use, it's broad enough and developer can do whatever they want to do and bring in, you know, and it's easier for them to even, you know, market their projects. Otherwise, you know, and that's what my gist was. Rather than identifying specific, let's go with a broader, and hopefully, I mean, we can listen to other commissioners and their views on that. But I think that's where I was coming from.
Before we go on, I do want to make sure the commission understands that the village district concept would still apply, in that there are extra design criteria that are already contained within our regulations. We're not proposing to delete those in any way. We're proposing to keep the village district intact, which would require that separate consultant review as far as aesthetics and design goes. So that would remain in place. As I said, it would be a pre-application, a requisite, so it is a requirement, followed by either a site plan or special permit, is already the base requirement for approval process.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just to get it started, I think this is acceptable, keeping in mind, of course, that it's a special permit and site plan let me get it right. Special permit and site plan approval. So we're not going to get any really oddball, strange things coming in and have the developer say, "Hey, you've got it in your regulations." So, so by adding that, I think personally, I think the more residential we have in that particular area, the better. But we're not getting to that point yet. This is just a regulation change.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
question to staff with regard to language. Can we place language in our regulations requiring owner occupied?
Well, there's something else I'm going to be talking about in a few minutes that we have to, and I can talk about it now, but under the Fair Housing Act, we must provide opportunities, diverse opportunities for all. And it doesn't matter that we have existing housing stock that we may have the largest apartment complex in this area of the state. That's a non-issue. Under the Fair Housing Act, we have to provide housing opportunities for all, which requires congregate, independent living, affordable housing, under the statute, multifamily housing, single-family housing, small single-family housing. So I would say no.
Well, it's for the commission to decide since I'm not going to be with you. But I'll simply give you or offer my thoughts on it. I don't know that placing provisions in the language requiring owner occupied or limiting the number of units, either in number or percentage, that can be no more than 5%, 10%, not owner occupied, is out of the realm of possibility. I think you can, I believe you can satisfy the need, the requirements that Kim just spoke to, and still place language in the in these new proposed this new proposed language requiring owner occupancy. I think language of that sort, perhaps with these, if the commission so sees fit, with the help, with some legal help, is something that the commission should consider. It is always best, in my opinion, that most, if not all, of the housing be owner occupied. I don't understand why it can't be affordable and owner occupied. Maybe I'm being a bit naive, I don't know, but I don't see why you can't have both. And I would offer those comments for the commission going forward. I may not be here, but good chance, folks, I'll be watching, even though I won't be all that close. Because my interest in what continues in Rocky Hill will not diminish. Kim, to move us away slightly, elderly housing and active adult. Just explain to me in what the legal difference is, or what the definition difference is.
Okay, well, housing for the elderly could be a large structure, like you may see like one at Elizabeth Court. I know it's more of a convalescent, but it also can be classified as housing for the elderly. 50 Cold Spring Road, as a matter of fact, the lodge at Cold Spring is an independent living facility with apartments, and it primarily is for age restricted, though there can be some as far as younger folks maybe seeking convalescent living. They don't have convalescent care there. So it is an independent living building, but it's age restricted.
For what it's worth, commissioners, active adult housing, in my personal opinion, you can't build it fast enough. As fast as you build it, it'll be sold and occupied. Here in Connecticut, we have an aging population, and the people who are looking to downsize, looking for communities just like that. Senior housing is a bit different. I understand that. I listened very carefully to Kim and her differentiation between the two, and it sounded like to me that one is more apt to allow multi-story buildings, 3 or more, than active adult. Am I incorrect, Kim?
Active adult, what they're building now, and you can see it throughout the town, they're typically building detached units. They may build townhouse style units.
Right.
Typically for elderly, they're building multi-story. But in that zone, we do allow for multi-story in the town center zone.
Well, that's something else the commission may wish to think about, but that's for you guys to figure out. As I will not be around. As a general thought and comment, I think this is a very good idea. The pre-application piece, some members of the commission know I'm a big fan of that. Not only for you to get a first look without anything being binding as to what an applicant is thinking about, but more importantly, the public gets a peek, a glimpse at what an applicant is thinking about. Strongly encourage that language will remain, is placed in whatever new language the commission may adopt going forward. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Dimple?
Any other, okay, Kim?
If I may, concerning the pre-application, I would strongly encourage the commission, not only if we go forward with this regulation, but in any of the pre-applications, that it really be a constructive exchange of ideas. Obviously, you can't say whether or not you would vote in favor or against
That's
something,
correct.
but it really needs to be a constructive critique of what's being proposed. I should point out to the commission that this proposal has not passed through preliminary legal review at this point in time, just so you know that.
I just have a question for clarity. You mentioned owner occupant. I was picturing this to be like apartment complex or like housing which would be rented, but you're saying these are like self-standing units that are going to could be sold. Like, I'm not understanding the percentage of owner occupant. Like, if you're purchasing it, you've got to live there, right? You're not going to be able to rent it.
I did not mention owner occupied. I think Phil
did.
did.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I mentioned that.
I'm just trying to understand the way this is being structured. This is
If I can jump in here, I am aware of places that set limits as to the number of housing units that are allowed, that can be allowed as rental units. In other words, owned by person A, but he doesn't live there. She doesn't live there. Rents them out. Generally, it's either a number of units or a percentage of units based on the aggregate, the entire number that are being built. It is not uncommon.
No, I agree with you, but I was trying to understand what was being proposed. Is that the same?
This is just a proposed regulation change. This isn't an application where we're actually going to decide through this process what is going to be there. This is just expanding what possibly can be used for. And again, I think I mentioned it in the beginning. Then we have to go through the special permit and site plan application approval also. That this is just allowing more flexibility to the developer, and then all the details of how much is going to be rental, how much is going to be owned and occupied, and everything else, because there's probably going to be some commercial involved too. That'll come up when we get a site plan application.
I respectfully disagree with you, Alan. I think if it's in the intent of the commission to limit the number of rental units, they need to say it in the language.
I think if I can pitch in, I hear, Phil, what you were saying. At the same time, an argument can be made. We do not have the statutorily required 10% affordable housing in Rocky Hill. So if somebody proposes a project where it is affordable housing project and we deny it, they go to court, court will say, you put in your regulation not more than 10% rental units. However, you did not put in for allowing affordable housing. That is kind of a partiality, or that's kind of, you're trying to limit one versus the other. So I
And
think, right.
And that's why I said
Yep.
that this whole thing needs to be passed before our lawyers, legal or whatever. The whole concept of limiting or a certain amount of owner occupied or whatever, whether it will pass muster. Will pass legal muster. I would assume the concept of affordable housing is not unique to Connecticut. It's found in most, if not all states. And yet I know it goes on in other places. But that's an assumption, presumption, whatever, that I really shouldn't make. I absolutely agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that if the commission is at all interested in doing something like that it has to pass muster with legal.
I do want to point out, I'll be talking to you after this under zoning enforcement and some of the things I've been dealing with this week. And I know I discussed it with Dimple when I called him, because this will be coming down the pike to the commission. And this does tie closely in with this regulation, Dimple. I think you may agree with that. So you may change your tune after we discuss what will be coming in from the state in the future. So that said, if there's any other generic comments on this, I would like to run this by our town legal counsel to see if there's.
Absolutely.
And I think, at least from my perspective, what I was thinking is, if we keep the regulations generic enough, it allows the developer to play around with the number, with the percentages, whatever, when they propose the project. Because what happens is sometimes the funding, especially state and federal funding, is tied to those numbers. So
Absolutely.
I think if we pigeonhole them in our regulations, now they get stuck later on, and there may not be any project that allows what we are trying to do. So I think when we say residential, then we can look at when proposal comes in, then we can figure out like, hey, what percentage we want active adult or rental or owner occupied or whatever we want to discuss.
Yeah, and that's my point too, is that we have the flexibility and the discretion when we actually do get a proposal from a developer to try to predict what somebody might come in at this time and take care of all contingencies. That's the reason we have a special permit approval process. And as long as, I mean, we do have, like I said, we do have discretion, as we know from the past, the recent past actually. That's it.
All right, anyone else? Kim, do you have anything you want to further talk about? Or
Well, not concerning this, but
Okay.
did you want me to maybe run this by town attorney and put this off to the September date?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
I could
Yeah, I
maybe,
Yeah.
I could have it come back before the commission in August,
Yeah,
have the public hearing in September.
yep. Yeah, we can do a public hearing for September, but in the meantime, you can discuss with the town attorney, and then we can keep discussing this,
So I would, if it's appropriate, I would make a a motion to table this to the August meeting?
Yeah,
Perfect.
I would second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes to table till August.
Thank you for the feedback.
Moving on to item 6, any other business? Item A, zoning enforcement.
Well, we've been asked, as staff, both Dave and I were asked to attend the webinar concerning Desegregate Connecticut, it's called. And we were doing this as zoning enforcement staff, primarily to review our regulations and how they may meet or not meet what the state may be doing in the future. We were told that there's a special legislative session coming up, and that possible modifications would be suggested to zoning enabling legislation, which is big. They've decided that the special session will be best left for election issues and police accountability issues. That may change, but what they're looking at doing is taking a new approach to zoning in order to prevent discrimination, to desegregate populations. And some of the groups involved are putting forth some very specific ideas. I will get this to you in a subsequent packet. They're talking about accessory apartments being allowed as of right. So even not requiring a zoning permit, but if they meet the regulations, it's just as of right. They're talking about creating affordable housing and housing diversity, once again, in compliance with Fair Housing Act, allowing for small scale developments or infill developments, for example, 2 to 4 units, maybe attached units on properties where you're creating maybe smaller multifamily units for greater housing diversity opportunity. Having some flexible rules for towns to zone 10% of their land for families to create housing diversity, multifamily or middle of the road housing, more affordable as well, setting aside 10% of the land in each community to do this. Reducing parking requirements, for example, in a multifamily development where it's all 1-bedroom units, you would have 1 space per unit. If it's a 2-bedroom unit or 2 or more bedroom unit, you would have 2 spaces per unit, hence keeping the cost of development down. And I know some communities have a different process for approving multifamily than they would say a single family housing development. Obviously, if it's a subdivision, that's a whole different process. Rocky Hill, not so much. If it's a single family development, you're going to be a subdivision, unless you're doing active adult housing. For example, the detached units that we have in town, they were done with the special permit process also. So we wouldn't be treating multifamily any other way. So that really isn't applicable with us. A big thing would be mandatory training. They're looking at mandatory training, at least 4 hours for all planning and zoning commission members, zoning board of appeals members, and staff. That's planning department staff. That would be myself, probably Dave, and probably Jim Solomon as well. So it'd be mandatory 4 hours per year, 2 of which deals with Fair Housing Act and affordable housing, and then there would be 2 others. That's something I think that, well, obviously there will be budgetary implications. I don't know that it would be that much, but I think that should be mandatory anyways. That would be handled through a town ordinance that would have to be created and through the town council and put on the books. That way, planning and zoning board of appeals members would know as part of their duties, mandatory training is required as well. They actually get into some of the wording choices in zoning regulations. We talk about in harmony with the character of the town. If the character of the town is single family housing, those words can and most likely are discriminatory if you're having a single family, primarily single family 2-lot zoning, and many of our rural towns in the state of Connecticut have 1 or 2 acre zoning. Those things would have to be modified. But these are things that will be coming up in a subsequent legislative session. There are bills being announced to do this. So you'll be seeing that. I had no idea that this was coming down the pike when the reasonable accommodation regulation was being proposed. That was in the works for a while, but due to the commission being changed at the beginning of 2020 and the COVID pandemic, we had to put that off. So, but this is new. We went to a webinar yesterday on this, and I wanted the commission to be aware that things will be changing because, as Dimple mentioned, we in Rocky Hill do not have our 10% of affordable housing. There was legislation a while back about communities having 10% of their housing be affordable housing stock as defined by state statute. There are 31 towns, I believe, out of 169, and maybe Dimple knows more about this, but I believe there are 31 towns that are now at 10%. Their housing stock is as affordable. We are probably around 5% right now.
And I think the irony is that we have the maximum rental housing, and it's unfortunate that we can't even meet 10%. So it is a high time that we start thinking about that before developers propose projects under 8-30G, which is they can put whatever they want, and commission denies, they go to court, and it's a big thing. So I think we have to think about that. And I think as far as the training, they were talking about the former P&Z members as well. Phil, please take note of that.
I find it interesting that they're proposing training for planning and zoning members, but not for members of the Board of Education or the town council. Hell, you could even become mayor without any training. Maybe even president, Mr. Chairman.
No, I think it's going to be interesting because, again, as Kim said, it's going to cost money. When you send people for training,
Of course.
and the other thing is, at least in my opinion, these are voluntary, jobs. And when you start putting these things together, now people are like, I don't want to do anything, it's like, it's a hassle. So, but we'll see what it is. We'll see what happens. But interesting things are happening at a state level. So I think it's good to look around, listen to things, what are happening, and maybe slowly we can adapt to things so that, we don't have a hammer coming down. Obviously we have to be ready.
Yeah, we will be, we've already, after yesterday, I did take a quick look at our regulations. I copied our regulations as a separate document on the computer and did a bunch of seek and find type things to see how many places in our regulations that we may need to modify. We do have quite a few, believe it or not, and I think we're doing pretty good. But I do think the diversity, the compliance with Fair Housing Act, I think the reasonable accommodation regulation will certainly help compliance as well. But we do need to get on that and be thinking about those things. And then discussing with the powers that be possible budgetary items. I mean, I know we put forth suggestions for training opportunities when they present itself to us. Obviously, if possible future legislation does go through at the state level, there will be other opportunities created for planning and zoning board of appeals and staff. So we will be budgeting for these things in the future. Under minor modifications, well, we don't have minor modifications per se. We did have the final plans come in for AutoZone at 1864 Sidestein Highway. They were signed, as were the plans for Mercury Fuel at 1761, 1775 Sidestein. So those came in also.
Now, what are those minor modifications? Can you go in?
They're not minor modifications, but I wanted to point out that we did have the final plans come in for 2 projects that did get approved.
Mm.
Yeah, we did not have any minor modifications. I put that on the agenda in case we have them, but we didn't have it. These were for actual projects, the AutoZone and the gas station Mercury Fuel.
Mhm. All right. Moving on to item 7, communications.
There was a letter received from Alfred Shuley, and I know our chairman did contact me. He did receive correspondence directly at home, and he did have it sent in with a town staff member that was delivering a packet of his. So so I wanted to make sure that everybody received it, but I did get an email, and they asked that I send this email out to the commission, so it was in your packet. It was dated June 22nd, concerning the proposed regulation amendment that had been on the last commission agenda. And also, I put in the packet something out of the Robert Fuller land use law treatise concerning spot zoning. I know that was raised at the last meeting as well. So there's something for you to read on that, definitions, and something in that out of the case law practice books. And for some reason, I am now getting the Historical Society. Of course, I am a life member, but I am getting more information from the Rocky Hill Historical Society. So just as a fund throw aside, an article on the ferry in town.
That was interesting article. Moving on to item 8, approved bills. We don't have any. Moving on to item 9, adjourn. Can I have motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And thank you. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Phil.
Mr. Chairman.
Phil,
You too,
Best of
Kim.
luck.
All the best to you guys.
Phil, it's been a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Take care, Phil.
Good luck.
Thank you all very much.
We'll see you at the training.
Yes.
Okay, I'll be the guest lecturer.
There you go.
Take care, folks.
Good night.
Yeah, I know.